my new rule, before we tackle any of our daunting specific problems here in America, we have to figure out how a country can solve any problem if so many of its people are so intractably, astoundingly, mind-numbingly stupid. And I'm not saying that as hyperbole or just out of frustration. I mean this country just might be empirically, verifiably too fucking dumb to continue as an ongoing enterprise. Jay Leno used to do a classic bit called Jaywalking, where he asked ordinary citizens the kind of question we used to consider common knowledge. And in the internet age, that bit has been, shall we say, updated. And is still a useful indicator of where exactly we are on the bird brain chart. Take a look at some of the answers given on a TikTok site called Project Better.
Who was the first person to land on the sun?
Lance something, Lance.
Lance Armstrong is correct. What is the biggest city in the world?
I think it's like
Asia?
What is the biggest city in the world?
Europe.
If you were born in 2021, how old would you be?
21.
What country is Venice, Italy located in for $100? Do you have any clue?
Gosh, I'm going to be a teacher, so I should know this.
You should.
Paris?
Where is Queen Elizabeth from?
Egypt.
Egypt? Where is it?
Brazil.
So you tell me, if a country is only as strong as its people, what can the future possibly hold for a population this moronic? Being a full-grown adult and thinking a human could walk on the sun? Or that the biggest city in the world was Asia?
Good morning. It's Friday, Aristotle Friday, July the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, the rape of the mind, and then we will have my take, animals, and then we are going to have you decide between Fox News and MSNBC, and then Aristotle chapter 6. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, His grace uncrown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for heroes prove in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths from David-Bahnsen.
It seems to be almost a law of human nature that it is easier for people to agree on a negative program, on the hatred of an enemy, on the envy of those better off, than on any positive task. The contrast between the we and the they, the common fight against those outside the group, seems to be an essential ingredient in any creed which will solidly knit together a group for common action. From their point of view, it has the great advantage of leaving them greater freedom of action than almost any positive program. F.A. Hayek. Covetousness not only carries the emotional gratification of resenting someone else, but it seeks to relieve oneself of the burdens and responsibilities of action. For that reason, it's a double sin. It contains all the corrosive elements of disdaining others for their success, while simultaneously preventing us from being our best selves.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you, and a quote from Ayn Rand. It is the fear of responsibility that prompts most people to adopt an attitude of indiscriminate moral neutrality. It is the fear best expressed in the precept, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." But that precept, in fact, is an abdication of moral responsibility. It is a moral blank check we give to others in exchange for a moral blank check that we expect for ourselves. There is no escape from the fact that we have to make choices. So long as we have to make choices, there is no escape from moral values. So long as moral values are at stake, no moral neutrality is possible. If we abstain from condemning a torturer, then we become an accessory to the torture and murder of the torture's victims. Unquote. Thank you. And now an Ayn Rand quote. Quote, "Nothing can corrupt and disintegrate a culture or a man's character as thoroughly as does the precept of moral agnosticism. The idea that I must never pass moral judgment on others, that I must be morally tolerant of anything, that the good consists of refusing to distinguish good from evil. It is obvious who profits and who loses by such a precept. It is not justice or equal treatment that you grant to me when you abstain equally from praising my virtues and from condemning my vices. When your impartial attitude declares, in effect, that neither the good nor the evil should expect anything from you. Whom do you betray and whom do you encourage?" Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And this is from one of my co-workers.
Even though I wasn't expecting on rescuing any more octopuses this summer, I had to rescue this guy from a live seafood market who was being sold as food. I set up a new tank.
So anyways, and he goes on to say how he has a tank at home or whatever. He thinks of himself as conservative. He's not. No conservative gives human attribution to animals. Okay? The true conservative knows that animals are animals, people are people, and that's it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Chapter 4. Why did they yield? The psychodynamics of false confession. Is there a bridge from the concept of Pavlovian conditioning to deeper psychological understanding? Only in those Pavlovian theoreticians who deny modern depth psychology does there exist a conflict between concepts. Pavlov himself acknowledged the presence of deeper, hidden motivations in man and the limitations of his study of animal behavior. Our task is to go back to the brainwashee, asking ourselves, how can we better convey an understanding of what happened to him? What were the Pavlovian circumstances, And what were the inner motivations to yield to enforced political manipulation of the mind? Was it cowardice? Was it a prison psychosis? Was it the general loss of mental stamina in our world? In the following observations and experiences, I hope to make use of the clinical insight actually provided by modern depth psychology. The upset philosopher. One day in 1672, a lonely philosopher of reason, Spinoza, had to be forcibly restrained by his friends and neighbors. He wanted to rush out into the streets and shout his indignation at the mob which had murdered his good friend Jan de Witt, a noble statesman of the Dutch Republic, who had been falsely accused of treason. But presently, he calmed down and retreated to his room where, as usual, he ground optical lenses according to a daily and hitherto unbroken routine. As he worked, he thought back to his own behavior, which had been no more rational or sensible than the behavior of the rioting crowd which had killed de Witt. It was then that Spinoza realized the existence of the emotional beast hidden beneath human reason, which, when aroused, can act in a wanton and destructive fashion and can conjure up thousands of justifications and excuses for its behavior. For, as Spinoza sensed, and as the great psychologist Sigmund Freud later demonstrated, people are not the rational creatures they think they are. In the unconscious, that vast storehouse of deeply buried memories, emotions, and strivings, lie many infantile and irrational yearnings, which constantly influence the conscious acts. All of us are governed to some degree by this hidden tyrant, and by the conflict between our reason and our emotions. To the extent that we are victims of unchecked unconscious drives, to that extent we may be vulnerable to mental manipulation, and although there is a horrifying fascination in the idea that our mental resistance is relatively weak, that the very quality which distinguishes one man from another, the individual I, can be profoundly altered by psychological pressures. Such transformations are merely extremes of a process we find operating in normal life. Through systemized suggestion, subtle propaganda, and more overt mass hypnosis, the human mind, in its expressions, is changed daily in any society. Advertising seduces the democratic citizen into using quackeries or one special brand of soap instead of another. Our wish to buy things is continually stimulated. Campaigning politicians seek to influence us by their glamour as well as by their programs. Fashion experts hypnotize us into periodic changes of our standards of beauty and good taste. In cases of menticide, however, this assault on the integrity of the human mind is more direct and premeditated. By playing on the irrational child lying hidden in the unconscious, and by sharpening the internal conflict between reason and emotion, the inquisitor can bring his victims to abject surrender. All of the victims of deliberate menticide, the POWs in Korea, the imprisoned traitors to the dictatorial regimes in the Iron Curtain countries, the victims of Nazi terror during the Second World War, are people whose way of life had been suddenly and dramatically altered. They'd been torn from their homes, their families, their friends, and thrown into a frightening abnormal atmosphere. The very strangeness of their surroundings made them more vulnerable to any attack on their values and attitudes. When the dictator exploits his victims' psychological needs in a threatening, hostile, and unfamiliar world, breakdown is almost sure to follow.
And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
The reparations movement is in full swing. Yes, there is an election coming. The theory is money atones for the sins of history. It might buy a few votes as well. Representative Cori Bush wants $14 trillion for, quote, racist policies which created the wealth gap, end quote. In California, a reparations commission wants payments for past housing discrimination, mass incarceration, and slavery. Fortune magazine calculates the payout at up to $1.2 million for each qualifier. Senator Elizabeth Warren wants $50 million for gay couples who had to pay higher taxes before gay marriage was legalized. New York City wants payments to level out the racial wealth gap. Evanston, Illinois, just outside Chicago, that's already started. $25 million is going to qualifying black residents. Supporters say it is, quote, a test run for the whole country. We are at the point where we're negotiating the price. What about the principle of whether any payments should be made at all? The president has said he wants a study of the reparations question. That is the classic political move. Appoint a commission and then ignore its report. But Biden cannot ignore the black vote. Without it, the Democrats' chance of winning the White House again, slim to none. Here's the Biden dilemma. How many votes will reparations buy? How many votes will reparations turn off? And how do you come off as the unifier of the country when you support racial division? Second hour of Varney just getting started.
So there you go. The couple of things about this. Number one is they do what they always do, is that they start by making an arbitrary claim. So in this case, racist wealth gap. They don't show any evidence or proof that there is any such thing. As far last time I looked, Oprah Winfrey was wealthier than the vast majority of white people in this country. And I can go on and on and on. LeBron James and on and on. So I don't see any racist wealth gap. The point is, we can't allow them to bully and intimidate us into taking their word for it. They have to be made to prove it. Prove it, prove it, prove it. One of the ways that you can do it is by simply denial. Oh, racist wealth gap. Nope, sorry, there isn't any. And walk away. And put them in the position of having to show statistics and other things. Make them earn it. I've said it over and over again. I'll keep saying it. If the left is going to win, make them earn it. Don't hand them the victories. The other thing in a much larger, big picture situation is I've got to wonder, am I the only one that smells desperation on the part of the Democrat Party? I mean, look at the things that they are supporting that they wouldn't have supported 5 or 10 years ago. They wouldn't have supported queer theory. They wouldn't have supported CRT. They wouldn't have supported reparations. So all of this smacks of desperation. This smacks of a party that knows something that the rest of us don't, that they have some kind of information that seems to suggest that the Democrat Party is in peril, is in big jeopardy. And so as a desperation move or moves in order to stave off that jeopardy, to stave off perhaps political extinction, they come up with these extreme ideas. So we'll have to see how that's going to play out. One of the things I was thinking also in regards to the border, letting people in, that also seems like a desperation move. Everything that the Democrat Party is doing these days and backing smacks of absolute desperation. Who would 10, 20 years ago you would expect the Democrats to back somebody like President Biden for office and then back him for re-election? I mean, look what happened to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went to the House of Representatives to participate in a hearing on free speech about big tech and free speech, and apparently he was treated rather rudely. He's a Kennedy. This is supposed to be the royalty of the Democrat Party, and he was treated extremely rudely, and apparently in many instances was not even allowed to speak, was basically shouted down. Does that sound like the actions of a party that is secure about its future? Or does that sound like the actions of a party that is absolutely desperate because it sees ahead of it its own demise? Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from the Twitter account of Sebastian Gorka.
I believe this is the West Coast assistant. Could you agree with that?
So I can tell you that there were deductions for what we believe to be escorts, and then that $10,000 golf club membership. Yes, that was not a golf club membership. That was for a sex club payment.
And that was from the account of Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Thank you. And now Senator John Kennedy.
It's not complicated. You don't have to be a senior at Caltech to figure it out. It says all of this stuff about Clarence Thomas calling him a house slave and other racist disgusting statements we condemn. Now, you either condemn it or you don't.
And that was Senator John Kennedy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Alex Epstein.
And the truth is that, like, the, quote, natural materials are very limited. Today's world depends on these unnatural man-made materials, and a shocking percentage of them come from engineering the amazing molecules of oil and natural gas. And the basic reason is they're called hydrocarbons, so combinations of hydrogen and carbon. And chemists now have this unbelievable ability to manipulate those hydrogen and carbon atoms into different molecules of different lengths and shapes so that it can have any function. So, for example, oil can be used to make like a sleep number bed or a bulletproof vest. So like the softest thing and the hardest thing. It's just unbelievable. Wow. And so you go to say, like, you know, natural gas is like involves a lot of fertilizer involves a lot of natural gas in terms of the production of that. And, you know, basically everything. So when I got into this first, I would do an oil walk throughout my life. So I just walk around the world and look at what's made of oil, and then what's powered by oil. And once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. And you just, oh my God, this is amazing. Everything is made of oil. One time for Halloween, I think in 2010, I dressed up as Big Oil, and I just had in my backpack like oil products and did 100 different things. Like everything is made of oil. So all my friends permanently got like exposed to this viewpoint. I think it was helpful. So that's one thing, is just that so many materials are made of oil and gas that are vital that we don't think about. And so when the price of those go up and the availability goes down, that means the price and availability of everything else goes up and down, just in terms of the materials. And it's even more true, though, for the energy. So energy is what powers the machines that improve our lives. And everything we use, everything we produce, involves using machines. So the price of energy determines the price of everything. When the price of energy goes up, the price of everything goes up.
And that was Alex Epstein. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now some Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Trusting the experts is not a function of science. It's not a function of democracy. It's a function of religion and totalitarianism, and it does not make for a healthier population.
And that was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about science. Thank you. And now some Fox News.
There's a study that COVID was bioengineered. So what? I mean, you can call that BS. You can call it, let's look into it, or you could call it what? So what? What are they afraid of?
The real question, they're afraid of the truth, actually, because the path to truth runs through free speech and open debate. We would not have locked down those schools if you had been allowed to say on the internet that we should not lock down those schools. We wouldn't have locked down the schools in the way we did. We would have known that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan if you had been allowed to say on the internet or elsewhere that it originated in a lab in Wuhan.
So, Vivek, are they embarrassed? Are they embarrassed that they botched the response to COVID, or is there a financial factor?
I think it's more than just the retrospective embarrassment, though I do think that's part of it. It's the fact that they want to hide from the truth in the present. And I think they want to have the option, Jesse, of saying that if this is the new order, if suppressing misinformation becomes a new progressive virtue, then the next time there's an emergency or so-called emergency circumstance, they can still pull that card to advance their political agenda.
So it's about power.
So in a certain way, it's preserving the options.
So it's
about
preserving the
preserving
power
the option.
Play. Okay. Because the next thing that happens, they suppress speech all over again because now there's precedent. There's a study that...
And that was Fox News. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now some Larry Elder.
A young black man aged 10 to the 43, I'm not making this up, is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man. And contrary to what Joe Biden said at Howard University recently, they ain't being killed by white supremacists. They're being killed by other blacks. Now, unless you're prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime, you have to ask yourself what the devil's going on. And what the devil's going on is the 10,000-pound elephant in the room, which is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids enter the world today without a father in the home married to the mother. 70%, up from 25% back in 1965.
And that was Larry Elder. Back in a minute. Okay, so before we get into today's You Decide segment, I want to remind everybody why I'm doing the You Decide segment. Is because so many news media organizations say things to the effect of, we'll give you the facts and let you decide. But the fact of the matter is that unless you're giving them giving the people two sets of facts, you're not giving them a choice. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is giving you a choice between two different news agencies on a particular topic. So, and that's the reason why I'm doing this. Thank you. So in today's episode of You Decide, it is going to be about the attempted censorship of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it's going to be MSNBC versus Fox News. First up, MSNBC.
Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is at the center of a contentious hearing on Capitol Hill today. A Republican-led House committee invited Kennedy to testify on censorship, despite controversial comments he's made about COVID, including the idea that the virus was designed to spare Jewish and Chinese people. Democrats say Kennedy's invitation was actually meant as a slight to President Biden, who Kennedy is running against. And the latest Quinnipiac poll shows Kennedy at 14%. NBC's Ryan Nobles is on Capitol Hill following this for us. Also with me, MSNBC contributor and author of the Old Goats newsletter and author of the book, His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life, Jonathan Alter. So, Ryan, what happened at this hearing? Obviously, there was more than one or two politically charged moments.
Yeah, you could say that, Chris. I think it certainly lived up to its potential as being a circus, much of which we've seen here on Capitol Hill during this version of Congress. Listen, the thing about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is that part of the reason that he was called to testify before this committee on the topic of censorship is because of so many of the outrageous things that he has said and the attempts by some social media companies to try and quell a bit of the information that he peddles online. It led, as you rightly point out, Chris, to a number of heated moments throughout the course of the hearing as Democrats tried to get him to explain some of those controversial stances. Here's one of those moments with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
You do see that, yes or no?
You're misstating.
No.
You are.
I quoted what you said earlier, and it is directly what you said. So just ask me yes or no.
I was describing an NIH-funded study.
No, you didn't cite any.
I was describing an NIH-funded study by Cleveland Clinic scientists.
Reclaiming my time. You did not reference. Reclaiming.
Published in USC Medical, which is one of...
The time is mine. I'm reclaiming it. Please ask the witness to stop talking.
You asked me a question.
Reclaiming.
Allow me to answer my question.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like about 10 seconds back.
You are slandering me incorrectly.
So did you get anything out of that? Because that's about how this hearing went for the better part of the day. Just a lot of back and forth, a lot of the Democratic Congress people in particular trying to press RFK Jr. on his stances, him trying to explain them away. And now Republicans did try to hone in on this idea of censorship, the power of social media companies when it comes to peddling this kind of information. And RFK Jr.'s argument was you should be able to say whatever you want on any type of platform, and no one should be able to tell you that you can't, which is not exactly what the First Amendment says, Chris, but that is part of was at the core of this conversation here in Washington.
Okay, so that was MSNBC, and now Fox News.
Well, I tell you what, it's been a day on Capitol Hill.
that heated House hearing underway again on the weaponization of government and big tech censorship. President Biden's top challenger on the left, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is a key witness. And it's kind of ironic that Democrats on the committee tried to censor him today about a censorship topic. They wanted to block his testimony because of some controversial comments that were attributed to him. Watch.
Why would the Republican leadership and the committee majority give a hearing and a platform to the witnesses today, specifically to Mr. Kennedy, a man who has recently claimed that COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people, but tells the black community and myself, a mother of 5 black children, that I should really be careful and not necessarily have the same safeguards to protect my family, my children, from a virus that has killed millions of people because I'm black.
I move that we move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as recently as last week.
Okay, so what that means is they wanted to take it out of the public sphere and put it in an executive meeting room where we wouldn't be able to watch what he said. Well, that didn't happen. They tabled that motion. And then R.F. Kennedy Jr. said this.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, have attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks.
You know, I was thinking today, who would cheer this on? China, because that's how they roll. We're not supposed to roll like that.
Exactly. And what was so interesting to me is he talked about ad hominem attacks there. This entire hearing is Democrats trying to malign, demonize, and push RFK Jr. out of the way. But where did this all begin? Why are we even having this hearing? You go to page, I think it's 8 or 9 of the lawsuit that the judge said, Biden, no, you can't censor people. We're going to stop these meetings from happening. There was a digital director named Clark Humphrey, 3 days into Biden's administration, who sends this email to Twitter. Can we keep an eye out for tweets that fall into this genre? And he sends RFK Jr.'s tweet. Hey, folks, wanted to flag below tweet and wondering if we can get moving on the process of having it removed ASAP. So 3 days in, Biden says, get the RFK Jr. tweet off Twitter. He'd go on to be a political rival.
So, Sean, I try to give people the space and grace to maybe they didn't know that then. Do you think they knew he was coming?
Oh, of course.
Do you think that they knew he was going to knock on the door to get into the White House and try and possibly run?
I think they had to. And so here's a Democrat candidate who has 20% of the Democrat primary vote. I mean, he's not a small player. He's a huge player in a race against the president of the United States. Number one, but number two, it's a really good point. He's pushing back on the government using agency to have someone else censor in a censorship game that they can't play themselves. It's fascinating. So I love that the Republicans have given him the platform. And by the way, just a reminder, this is what Democrats used to stand for. This is like old Bill Clinton-esque policies that RFK is talking about, not this new left-wing leftism, Marxism that's come from the Democrats.
Actually, I think Democrats are very nervous about RFK Jr. And I was looking at a Quinnipiac poll this morning. He's got 14% against an incumbent in the White House, the Democratic Party. That is a big number. That's double digits. But, you know, Hakeem Jeffries, about an hour ago, made these comments that where I think this is where you see how worried they are. Yep. This is Hakeem Jeffries. Robert F. Kennedy is a living, breathing false flag operation. His campaign is being run by right-wing political operatives who have one objective, take down President Joe Biden. You're nervous.
Who's the right-wing operative running his campaign? I'd love to know.
Me too.
So, but that's also something similar to what the left is saying about no labels, the third party. Yeah. They don't want any competition whatsoever, no matter where it's coming from Joe Biden. But the one that really hit me today was when they were trying to tear him apart, some of the congressmen and women who were, had their 5 minutes on the clock. And it was brought up that he was racist and that, the Tuskegee Project, that his comments about vaccines would then keep blacks from getting a vaccine. And it was an emotional moment when he said, my family members, remember who his uncle was, JFK, signed the end of the Tuskegee experiments. He goes, I was already born then. I mean, the legacy of the bipartisan victories in this country he's bringing up. He's talking about a time when they all used to get along, and he's talking about his family's sort of place in history. And it pretty much shut the conversation.
Yeah, and it's telling that Democrats would rather attack him personally than actually deal with the substance of the hearing, which was the weaponization of the government against free speech. And it used to be, we don't have to agree with everything that RFK says. We don't have to think that all of his ideas are good. But it used to be that the way that you flesh out the bad ideas is by publicly debunking and debating them. Now, all the Democrats want to do is shut down speech entirely. They don't want to give him a platform, and perhaps it is because they're worried that he poses a significant threat to President Joe Biden.
The collusion is already in the courts, and the Biden administration is already losing in the courts over their attempting to censor social media. So let's talk about facts here versus theatrics.
Yeah. So maybe his rise now in the polls looks like that Jason Aldean song, looks like the Barbie movie. The more you talk about it and put it out there, you're helping him out. Maybe they're nervous about that on the left, too.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my...
Okay, so that was Fox News, and that was MSNBC versus Fox News on the issue of the attempted censorship of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You decide. Thank you. And now, Chapter 7 of Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer Adler.
Chapter 6, The Four Causes. The four causes are the answers that Aristotle gives to four questions that can and should be asked about the changes with which we are acquainted in our common experience. They're common sense questions, and so are the answers. Let us begin by considering them as they apply to changes brought about by human beings, especially the things they produce or make. That will help us to consider the four causes as they operate in the workings of nature. The first question about any human production is, what is it going to be made of? If you asked this question of a shoemaker at work, the answer would be leather. If you asked it of a jeweler fashioning bracelets or rings out of precious metals, the answer might be gold or silver. If you asked it of a gunsmith producing a rifle, the answer would probably be wood and steel. The kind of material named in each case, on which the craftsman works and out of which he is producing a particular product, is the material cause of the production. It is one of four indispensable factors without which the production would not and could not occur. The second question is, who made it? That would appear to be the easiest question of all, at least when we're dealing with human productions. It may not be so easy when we come to the changes that take place in nature, and to the things produced by nature rather than by men. So far as human productions are concerned, the question has already been answered in what was said in answer to the first question. The shoemaker is the maker of the shoe, the jeweler of the bracelet or ring, the gunsmith of the gun. The maker, in each case, is the efficient cause of the production. The third question is, what is it that is being made? On the face of it, that question is so easy that it may make you impatient to have to consider it. It is obvious, you may say, that what is being made by the shoemaker is a shoe, by the jeweler a ring, and so on. But when I tell you that Aristotle called the answer to this question the formal cause of the change or production, you may be puzzled by the introduction of that word formal, though it is, as you will soon see, the precise word to pair with material, the first of the four causes. I will return to the explanation of formal after we have considered the last of the four causes. The fourth question is, what is it being made for? What purpose is it intended to fulfill? What objective or use did the maker have in mind as the end to serve? In its simplest form, the question is, why is it being made? And the answer, with regard to the productions we've been talking about, comes quickly. We all know what shoes and rings and guns are for, what function they perform, or what purpose they serve. The fourth factor in human productions Aristotle called the final cause, calling it that because the factor being referred to is an end in view. When you or I make anything, the end we have in mind is something that we achieve last therefore, finally, we must finish making it before we can put it to use for the purpose we had in mind. I said earlier that the four causes are indispensable factors that must be present and operative whenever men produce anything. To call them indispensable is to say that, taken together, they are that without which the production could not have taken place. Each of the four factors taken by itself is necessary, but none by itself is sufficient. All four must be present together and operate in relation to one another in a certain way. The workman must have material to work on and must actually work on it. By doing so, he must transform it into something that the materials in hand can be made to become. And what has been made must be of some use to the person making it. In other words, he must have had a reason for making it, for without that he would probably not have expended the effort to make it. You may question the last of these statements. You may wonder whether the final cause, the reason for making something, must always be present and operating. Isn't it possible for someone to produce something without having a reason for doing so? Without having in mind, in advance, a deliberate purpose that he wishes to serve? That question is not easy to answer with certainty, though you must admit that, for the most part, human beings do make the effort to produce things because they need or want the things they're engaged in producing. Yet they may also, on occasion, fiddle around with materials and, as a result, produce something unexpected, aimlessly, or, shall we say, playfully. When this happens, there would appear to be no final cause, no end result being aimed at. A purpose for the object produced, a function for it to perform, may be thought up after the production is completed, but the producer of it did not have it in mind in advance. It could, therefore, hardly have been an indispensable factor or a cause of what occurred. When we turn from human productions to the workings of nature, the question about the presence and operation of final causes becomes more insistent. We cannot avoid facing it squarely, but we should certainly be uneasy about saying that nature has this or that in mind as the end result that it aims at. Perhaps when I am able to explain why Aristotle calls the third of the four causes the formal cause, I will also be able to answer the question about the operation of final causes in the workings of nature. Before I do so, let me summarize the four causes by describing them in the simplest terms possible. Because these statements about the four causes are so very simple, they may also be difficult to understand. We must pay close attention to the key words that are italicized in each statement. 1. Material cause, that out of which, italicized, something is made. 2. Efficient cause, that by which, italicized, something is made. 3. Formal cause, that into which, italicized, something is made. 4. Final cause, that for the sake of which, italicized, something is made. What do we mean when we say that into which something is made? The leather out of which the shoe was made by the shoemaker was not a shoe before the shoemaker went to work on it. It became a shoe, or got turned into a shoe, by the work he did, which transformed it from being merely a piece of leather into being a shoe made out of leather. That which at an earlier time was leather, not having the form of a shoe, is now, at a later time, leather formed into a shoe. That is why Aristotle says that shoeness is the formal cause in the production of shoes. The introduction of that word shoeness will help us to avoid the worst error we can make in dealing with formal causes. We might be tempted very naturally to think of the form of a thing as its shape, something we're able to sketch on a piece of paper. But shoes come in a wide variety of shapes as well as colors and sizes. If you stood in front of a shoe store window with sketch pad in hand, you would find it very difficult or impossible to draw what is common to the various shapes of the shoes in the window. You can think of what is common to them, but you cannot draw it. When you do have an idea of what is common to all shoes of every shape, size, and color, then you have grasped the form that Aristotle calls shoeness. Without there being such a form, shoes could never be made. The raw materials out of which shoes are made could never be transformed into shoes. Please notice that word, transform. It contains the word form. When you transform raw materials into something that they are not, leather into shoes, gold into bracelets, and so on, you are giving them a form that they did not previously have. A shoemaker, by working on raw materials, transforms them into something they can become, but which, before he worked on them, they were not. We can get further away from the mistake of thinking that the formal cause is the shape a thing takes by considering other kinds of change that we discussed before. Changes other than the production of things such as shoes, rings, and guns. The tennis ball you set in motion moves from your racket across the court to your opponent's baseline. You are the efficient cause of that motion, propelling the ball by the force of your stroke. The ball is the material cause, that which is being acted on. But what is the formal cause? It must be some place other than the place from which the ball started out when you hit it. Let us suppose that the ball lands on the other side of the net, is missed by your opponent, and comes to rest against the back fence. The place where it comes to rest is the formal cause of the particular motion that ended there. From having been here, on your side of the net, its position or place has been transformed into being over there, against the back fence. The green chair that you paint red is similarly transformed in color. So, too, the balloon you blew up. It transformed in size. Redness is the formal cause of the change you brought about by painting the chair, just as over-there-ness is the formal cause of the change you brought about by hitting the tennis ball. In each of these changes, you are the efficient cause. In one of them, the green chair is the material cause, that which you acted on in painting it red. In the other, the collapsed balloon is the material cause, that which you acted on when you blew it up. The three kinds of change just considered also occur naturally without man entering the picture as efficient cause. When we examine their natural occurrence, identifying the four causes becomes more difficult, and some new problems arise. However, what has already been said about humanly caused changes will be of some help to us. Sunshine ripens the tomato and turns it from green to red. The rays of the sun are the efficient cause of this alteration, and the tomato itself, the subject undergoing the change, is the material cause of it. Here, as in a person's painting a green chair red, redness is the formal cause. From having been green in color, that is what the tomato becomes. But here, there is no final cause distinct from the formal cause just named. The person who painted the green chair red may have done so for the sake of having it match a set of chairs in a certain room. The purpose, or end, the individual had in mind was distinct from the redness that was the formal cause in the transformation of the chair's color, but we would hardly say that the sun, in shining on the tomato, wished to make it red as a sign that it had at last become edible. The end result of the tomato's ripening, so far as its surface color is concerned, consists in its being red. Its being red is both the formal and the final cause of the change. Much the same can be said about the rock that wears away under the battering of the waves, becoming smaller in size as a result of that process. The process may go on for a long time, but at any given moment, the size of the rock at that time is both the formal and the final cause of the change, the decrease in size that has occurred so far. The account just given of a natural alteration in color and a natural decrease in size applies as well to a natural change of place. The tennis ball that is accidentally dropped falls to the ground and eventually comes to rest there. That local motion comes to an end at the place where the ball comes to rest, and that place is the formal as well as the final cause of the motion. If, in this case, one were to ask about the efficient cause, the force of gravity would probably be named, an answer that most of us learned in school, but that would have puzzled Aristotle. The fact does not affect our understanding of the difference between an efficient cause on the one hand and material, final, and formal causes on the other. However, it is named or designated. It is always that which, in any process of change, acts upon a changeable subject or exerts an influence upon it, that results in that changeable subject's becoming different in a certain respect. Red from having been green, smaller from having been larger, there from having been here. Let us consider one other kind of change, the growth of a living thing that, though it involves increase in size, involves much more than this. Aristotle uses the familiar example of the acorn that falls to the ground from an oak, takes root there, is nurtured by sunshine, rain, and nutrients in the soil, and eventually develops into another full-grown oak tree. The acorn, he tells us, is an oak in the process of becoming. What it is to be oak is both the final and the formal cause of the acorn's turning into an oak. The form that the acorn assumes when, through growth, it reaches its full development is the end that the acorn was destined to reach simply by virtue of its being an acorn. If, instead of being an acorn, the seedling had been a kernel taken from an ear of corn, our planting it and nurturing it would have resulted in a different end product, a stalk of corn with ears on it. According to Aristotle, the end that is to be achieved and the form that is to be developed in the process of growth are somehow present at the very beginning, in the seed that, with proper nurturing, grows into the fully developed plant. They are not present actually, he would acknowledge, for then the acorn would already be an oak and the kernel a stalk of corn. But they are present potentially, which is simply the opposite of their being present actually. It is the difference between the potentiality that is present in the acorn on the one hand and the potentiality that is present in the corn kernel on the other, which causes the one seed to develop in one way and the other seed to develop in another. Today, we have a different way of saying the same thing. Aristotle said that the entelechy of one seed differed from the entelechy of the other. All he meant by that Greek word was that each seed had in it a potentiality that destined it to reach, through growth and development, a different final form or end result. We say, when we use the language of modern science, that the genetic code in one seed gives it a set of directions for growth and development that is different from the set of directions given by the genetic code in the other seed. We think of the genetic code as programming a living thing's growth and development from the very moment when that process starts. Aristotle thought of a living thing's inherent potentialities as guiding and controlling what it becomes in its process of growth and development. Up to a certain point, the two descriptions of what happens are almost interchangeable. The observable facts to be accounted for remain the same. Acorns never turn into cornstalks. That this is so must be because there is something initially different in the matter that constitutes the acorn on the one hand, and in the matter that constitutes the kernel of table corn on the other. Calling what is their genes that program growth and development, or calling them potentialities that guide and control growth and development, does not make much difference to our understanding of what is going on, but as most of us know, it does make a difference to what human beings can do to interfere with natural processes. Our scientific knowledge of DNA, an abbreviation for a term in biochemistry, enables us to experiment with the genetic code of an organism and perhaps to make significant changes in the directions it gives. Aristotle's philosophical understanding of the role that potentialities play did not enable him, nor does it enable us, to interfere in the slightest way with the workings of nature. I shall have more to say in the next chapter about potentialities and actualities, and also about matter and form as fundamental factors in changes of all sorts, both natural and artificial. These four factors, although not identical with the four causes, are closely related to them. To whet your appetite for what is coming next, let me ask you to consider again one more change that has already been mentioned, the special kind of change that Aristotle called coming to be and passing away. As an example of that special kind of change, I'm going to take an occurrence that is most familiar to us in our everyday life. We sit down to dinner, and in the course of it we eat a piece of fruit. The apple on our plate, when taken from the tree, had finished growing. But it is still a living thing, with seeds in it that can be planted to sprout more apple trees. It shows no signs of decay or rotting. We eat it, all but the core. What has become of the apple? We have not only eaten it, chewed it up, digested it, but we also have drawn some nourishment from it, which means that it has somehow become part of us. Before we started eating it, the organic matter of that piece of fruit had the form of an apple. After we finished eating, digesting, and drawing nourishment from it, the matter, which once had the form of an apple, has somehow become fused or merged with our own matter, which has the form of a human being. The apple has not become a human being. Rather, it would appear matter itself has been transformed from having the form of an apple to having the form of a human being. It ceased to be apple matter and became human matter. What is meant by matter itself as opposed to apple matter and human matter? Can we say that matter itself is that which remains the permanent underlying subject of change in this remarkable kind of change that happens every day when we eat the food that nourishes us? I hope I can throw some light on these matters in the next chapter.
And that was chapter 6, apparently, not chapter 7, of Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.